Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Los Angeles jazz pianist Connie Hahn. She just released her debut CD on Mack Avenue Records called Crime Zone. This modern-day 22-year-old artist has an affinity for hard bop and began her jazz journey in earnest at the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, and there was a lot of big names that came out of that school, like Josh Groban. She has a distinct image and sound that is grabbing the attention of the world of jazz and beyond. A soulful voice that is full of talent and welcome on this modern jazz landscape. We talked about quite a bit, so get to know her and dig this interview, my friends.
First off, I just want to tell you I've really enjoyed Crime Zone, and I want to thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you dig it, man.
Yeah, it's a great album. So, talk to me about this recording. Talk to me about what your kind of mentality was, or your goal for the listener for this album.
Crime Zone is really a culmination of all my influences, which are heavily informed by the modern jazz tradition, which I believe is defined by the post-bop masters in the 60s, such as Freddie Hubbard and McCoy Tyner, by extension the neoclassicist sort of Young Lion era in the 90s that was led by guys like Wynton Marsalis, Kenny Kirkland, etc. And really, the compositions are a culmination of all the guys that I really admire, and I love their music. In addition to that, the music that I wrote, as well as the improvisational concepts, I really set out to make it a personal challenge to get myself out of my comfort zone, to really write music that would provoke thought in me. And I think by extension, in doing that, you also provoke thought in the listener. So it's really personal, and I just really hope that listeners that enjoy the ride. It's kind of a personal creative journey. It's kind of interesting because when you write music, you think that because it comes from you, it'd be easy to play or easy to interpret, but in fact, it's not the case. A huge part of being a jazz musician is being able to interpret music, especially very simple songs like in the American Songbook, in ways that are fresh and in ways that people don't think of. And I actually had to sort of take the same approach to my own music because it was actually kind of hard for me. I wrote a lot of that music when I was a little bit younger, when I was like 19 or 20, and I've gotten a lot of shit together since then musically and just personally. When I wrote it, I felt like I was compositionally a little bit more advanced than being an improviser. So actually writing it and playing it and working on it, especially with my co-writer and producer, Bill Lydafsky, who plays drums on the album, it's actually really helped me grow just as a person, as an artist, and especially a jazz musician. So, it's really personal, and I really think that these sort of challenges that I've faced in writing this music, hopefully that will translate to something that is palatable to a listener.
You mentioned hard bop. You've mentioned that you got a modern spin on things, and you're clearly one of those voices in modern jazz right now that's making waves. You're getting out there. So my question to you is this: how healthy is jazz in 2018, not only in America but in the world, according to how you see things?
That's kind of a loaded question, man. I love it. I like it.
Yeah, there's a couple different angles on it, but I'm biased. So as far as I'm concerned, especially coming from an area like Kansas City right now that's going through its own level of renaissance, to me, it's doing very well. But from a musician standpoint, it's obviously going to be a different kind of entity.
For forward thinking as I may portray myself, especially in my music and the guys I like, I'm also, some people might call me a traditionalist because, in the guys that I admire, like Freddie Hubbard and McCoy Tyner, there is a very clear line to their predecessors back in the 50s and 40s to be evolving even into Harlem Stride. So what I'm trying to say is that even though for me, playing music is kind of indulgent, it's also sort of to hopefully solidify my place in the jazz scene where I'm bringing a voice that is while modern, also pretty steadfast to the tradition, because quite frankly, though there are so many amazing artists out there right now pushing their own voice, just like I am, I wish there was more tradition. Like when I want to define tradition by just the straight up like swinging music. I define a lot of, or the vast majority of acoustic jazz music by revolving around how a drummer interprets the ride cymbal in swing music. And I feel like, especially due to formalized education of jazz, I feel like traditional, quote-unquote traditional jazz has been pigeonholed into being like this archaic museum art form. And I feel like that's so backwards, because to me, swinging is not archaic. Swinging is like happening now, and it's supposed to be like kind of like a lifestyle that you, or like a philosophy you live by. It's not like I learned how to swing in high school, or I learned how to swing in college, and I'm gonna like keep that skill in my pocketbook. But after all that, I'm just gonna go and play fusion or hip hop.
Right.
I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, but like basically like I'm just trying to make like traditional jazz hip again, where it's not all about like worshiping dead guys and like regurgitating stuff like we're playing in the repertoire ensemble. I'm trying to, you know, in my own music, I'm trying to say in my own voice like, hey, you know, you can still make like acoustic straight ahead jazz, like this hip thing that is creative, because to me the essence of this music is about being spontaneous and creating something out of nothing, but at the same time having that something come from like a huge legacy of just language and just rich history. It's a very fine line that some people who might not realize the nuances going on might think that it's contradictory, but it's really not. A way I like to put it is called like being rebellious within the tradition. I feel like right now what's going on is that a lot of people are being rebellious against the tradition. That kind of sums up, I guess, how I feel. And health-wise, like talent, we have an overabundance of talent and great artistry and great ambition. So that part of it is healthy. But as far as like carrying on the legacy of jazz, as well as preserving the philosophy of being a spontaneous improviser, I think that can use some work.
Let me ask you this. Did you grow up in L.A.?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was born and raised here. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you got interested in jazz at 14, correct?
Yeah. So basically, I had been involved in music since I was very young at 5 years old, but it was from a place that was completely different from jazz. My parents played traditional Chinese music and classical music, and honestly, my parents always felt that jazz was sort of like an uncivilized art form. So I was never like encouraged to go after it, but like when I got into an arts high school called the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, I got in for voice and classical piano, and that was my first time to. Like, it was like my first time exposure to, like, the Los Angeles music, professional music scene. Even though it was a high school at the time, it was definitely really aggressive, just the curriculum and the conservatory culture of it. And at the time, they had a really great jazz program that opened my eyes to what this music is. And I think there's always been something inside of me where I've always wanted to be, like, a creative improviser. I didn't know it was jazz, but it was kind of calling to me in a way. So, in short, yes, I discovered jazz at 14 at LACA.
As you started getting into jazz, why did it make sense, and why does it make so much sense that this has been your career path up to this point?
I think jazz represents a lot of who I am as a person. I think jazz has always been about being unorthodox and edgy and not obvious, not boring. I don't know. I mean, if I hadn't discovered jazz, I probably would have gone into like rock and roll or something, or progressive rock. And I mean, I had always loved stuff that was intellectual but not too pretentious, and I always felt like jazz was like the perfect art form for me.
So up to this point in your career, as you've progressed to this point with albums and live performances, How do you feel about things? Are you happy with where you're at right now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot has happened in the past year. Being signed to Mack Avenue Records and coming out with my debut, Crime Zone, on the record, and absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, I of course, I always want to play more and just play gigs and just play this music, and more of that would be awesome. But yeah, man, I'm happy. I mean, it's the process of being an artist. You embrace the ups and downs. And
so let's say we talk 10 years from now, and you're looking down the road, and I ask you what's been going on. Is there anything that, as far as like where you want to go, who you want to play with, what you want to do you want to consistently release albums on a yearly basis? What are you kind of looking at as you go down the road now after this first album?
I want to continue making my own albums as a band leader, and especially collaborate with my current team, which includes my producer and drummer, Bill. But, you know, I also do hope to focus on some sideman work with some of my heroes. You know, I'd also play with like Joe Lovano and Bill Sword and just some of the great legends. Absolutely. I mean, right now I'm focusing on my band leader career just because I have a very specific vision on what I want to do, especially with my branding, not only as a jazz musician but also just as an overall artist. I dress really weird, and like one of my inspirations is Yusha Wong is what some people like to call the Beyonce of the classical world. She's a classical pianist who was born in Beijing, and she is a phenomenal, fiery pianist that knows all the classical repertoire. It's absolutely insane, and she also has these really provocative like dresses and like wears these super high heels, and I just love that. It's just like, you know, that's a part of my brand. You know, I want to be provocative, provoke thoughts in an unusual way, because there is a very specific image that is associated with jazz musicians, which is usually men in fedoras and suits playing in small clubs. But I sort of want to subvert that while also playing this music right. Makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about mentors. Do you remember any advice that you got in your life that's really resonated or rang through your life up to this point?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm going to mention Bill again just because he's pretty much been my guiding force from my transition from a jazz student into a full-fledged jazz artist and professional musician. He actually encouraged me to pursue jazz before I even thought that I could actually do it, because at the time when I was like 14, I was just like, the music is so overwhelming. But his school of thought in approaching the music and deconstructing it in a really literal and really almost like scientific way, while also being totally aware of the raw components of this music, which is groove and feel. That was a huge part of my training with him. And it was so interesting not having to study with like a jazz piano teacher, because I was so grateful to my parents, because they taught me, they sort of secured my technical training as a classical pianist so that I didn't really have to focus too much on maintaining my instrumental ability when I was learning jazz. I was sort of afforded the ability to work with Bill, who played a different instrument, and we were able to really focus on the social aspects of this music, really focus on what it means to accompany people and what it really means to assimilate a particular style and the nuanced versions of said style. So, I mean, a huge part of my ability to be who I am and play how I am today is because of that mentorship and that ability to really tackle deficiencies and things that you don't understand as a young person. And I mean, it just gets really specific, and I'm really so grateful for the training that she provided me, because, you know, going to LOXA, it was such an eye-opening experience in what jazz education is. And I'm so glad that jazz has been legitimized in higher education to be on the same footing as classical music, especially in America. But what I think sometimes that does is that can create sort of these patterns that certain educators may repeat in the classroom about jazz, like you have to listen more, you have to learn all these tunes, you have to do all this and this, and it's all like super cookie cutter stuff that isn't tailored to what your brain is actually processing when you're playing this music. And what I really learned from Bill was that he was able to very specifically tackle certain deficiencies that I had, and I was able to work through them in a really scientific way. So you just gotta practice. Like you have to really take practicing seriously, and you have to be disciplined, and you have to have a good work ethic. It's not so important to punch in the amount of times you practice every day. It's not about just moving your hands around on your instrument and saying, I practice today, so that means I'm going to get better. No, you can't wait around to get better.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, you have to really tackle the issues that you have and be proactive about getting what you want. And you can't hang on a rhythm. If you get lost, if another musician plays a polyrhythm, you have to address why you are not hanging. So
sure.
That's a really huge part of like what I do, work ethic and just getting it right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: why do you love jazz?
I love jazz because it says what I want to say. I mean, that's kind of like a soundbite answer. Jazz is raw, but at the same time, it's so intellectually stimulating. Like it like stimulates all of your senses. It stimulates like that primal aspect of being human, while also like stimulating the part of being human that is like super cerebral. It's crazy. It's actually mind-blowing. I think like a musician that really embodies what I'm trying to say is Elvin Jones. His playing and just his concepts about rhythm and interpreting the triplet, especially in jazz, it's like it provokes thought, but it also makes you feel something. Like it's so connected to the human soul, and I just feel like other art forms. I mean, I don't want to say that jazz is like more deep than other art forms. What I'm trying to say is that there is such a unique depth, and it goes so far in jazz that you just can't really get in other music. And honestly, I have to say that it's due to the African rhythm element that pretty much defines and what makes jazz, right? I mean, it's really the black element that makes it all work, as well as your European classical tradition. I guess in short, I just love that it can be intellectual while also being totally human and being totally raw, and like there's that aspect where no matter how much you study this music and no matter like how much jazz harmony rhythm you know, if you can't like absorb and assimilate the information in a way that is really abstract, you just have to go through with it. Yeah. I also want to add that because I didn't go to school for jazz, I really just blazed my own path and just like went on my own schedule on how to practice, on how to learn this music. Like, I love this music because it's so challenging in that you just have to do it. Like, you can't just like study it from a book. You just have to do it. You just have to throw yourself out there and just do it. And I guess it's not unique to jazz, but I think especially in this music, you just have to know it by listening to it and playing it to really get it, no matter how much you study it. And that's what makes it so fascinating. I guess I'm kind of a masochist, where I just like to do things that make me feel stupid.
Yeah, no, that's
it
cool.
Makes me feel
that's
like
cool.
I want to grow.
I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Hey, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz to talk about your new album, to talk about your career. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Los Angeles, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Connie for her music, her time, and her stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.